Well, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and look at a little bit more specifically how to go ahead and do a CI. And so with this particular example, we're going to look at a single article and kind of look at what sort of things to kind of skim over, what to read more in depth, and then how we would fill out the CI form. So I want to start off with the article that's going to be read is, Do Cognitive Changes Accompany Development in the Adolescent Brain? So right there, we can already tell, I'm going to highlight it here, that it's focused on adolescent brain development, and they're looking at if there are cognitive changes and how those maybe impact the behavior of the adolescent. So I've already got a pretty good idea of what the theme might be for this single article. Now, to get a little more clarity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move down and I'm going to look at the abstract. And let's kind of read that over together real quickly. It says, the news that the brain continues to develop through much of adolescence risks becoming an explanation for anything and everything about teenagers and suggests the need for closer analysis. Okay, so we know it's going to go dive into a little more detail about brain development in adolescence. And it's essential to such analysis is clarifying what develops at a psychological level during these years. Examination of the contemporary research data on adolescent cognitive development identifies, so right now we're getting to the crux of the things that we might see here. So adolescent development identifies increased executive function control, major dimension of cognitive development during the second day of life. Okay. So that's another good idea of what we might focus on talking about this idea of executive control. It also points to, as I read the rest of the article, that I'm going to go ahead and try to focus on what do they mean by executive control, and is there any way of getting that at more specifics. And so what I'm going to do now is do a quick skim of the contents of the article. I'm going to go back and read it in more depth, not particularly in this video, because I don't want you to see me having to read for a half hour, but we're going to kind of show you the process. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the headings. And so the first part is just an overview of what may be going on. And then the second decade, that's going to go ahead and refer to the adolescence when we talk about the second decade. Okay, and so there's a little bit more overview going on here. And what I'm doing right now is kind of skimming. And what I'm looking for, going back up to the top here, is what's the next heading? And then, oh, here it is, what develops? And we already know the focus of the chapter is on what are the changes involved. And then under the subheading of what develops, we have information processing. So we know there's some sort of information processing changes. And so there's probably going to be more specifics there. And you even have some pictures. And then as part of that information processing, we know that learning is another thing that's going to be impacted in a particular way. And so I continue to go on down and look through here. Oh, here we have self-directed inquiry. And so that's going to get a better idea of how maybe the learning changes over time, especially with adolescents. And then most crucially, how are decisions being made? So just skimming the headlines and then also looking at diagrams can be really helpful in trying to illustrate what the main points the author is getting at. Okay, so tables and figures right there can be very helpful when we're looking at the theme and coming up with more examples in the CI process. So the article is going to go on to talk about now brain development and cognitive development, and that's back now that they've talked about all the things going on is the focus of the inquiry for this particular author, and then he goes on to kind of wrap things up. Okay, so after I've kind of skimmed that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go back to the beginning and read it through in a much more careful manner. We're going to go ahead and say I already did that in the interest of brevity for this particular video. So now I've read the article and it's time to do the CI. So as you can see here, I have the CI template, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to type my name in here. We'll say the due date is now. And so here is, we're going to say this is CI assignment 1, and I can hit the CI assignment. So now the first thing I need to do is come up with the theme. Okay, the theme was that state part. And as I think about it, here is a very specific theme as to the article's content. And it's easier when you have a single article to make sure that it is more specific. Still a single sentence, but what I came up with is the process in the brain that control thoughts, learning, decision making, and self evaluation become more advanced during adolescence due to variables such as experience and increased freedom. Now, this may be a little bit longer theme than many of you need to have, but it does get at it being specific, but not so specific that it goes on and on. It's a single sentence. So next we need to move on to the expansion. And what we see with the expansion is we're going to take some of the details of this particular article and expand on them. So as you can see here, it says, as the brain continues to develop into adolescence, so does its cognitive abilities. During this time, there is an overproduction of gray matter at puberty, followed by a reduction or pruning of neural connections that do not continue to be used. Enhanced myelination also occurs at this point, which is increased insulation of established neural connections, which improves their efficiency. Due to these changes in the brain, there is a change in adolescent thought capabilities from concrete operational to formal operational, which allows them to think even more abstractly. Okay, so this may get into a little more technical words than what you would maybe use. The importance is to expand using your own words and how you understand that article, not just simply cutting and pasting from the part of the article. So now I need to think of an example that relates to my theme. And so an example here would be a teenage boy being offered drugs from some of his older friends. And he takes time to think about the consequences of his actions and whether taking the drugs is a path that he wants his life to take. So you're showing the abstract thinking that was referred to earlier. He also thinks about the results of his reactions to his friend's proposition. After careful consideration, thanks his friend, but respectfully declines because he's learned about the dangers of drugs in the past and made decisions not to possibly lead his life in a negative direction. Now, this was just a made-up example. It was not necessarily one that you got from the article, and probably and certainly isn't from my necessarily personal experience. And so that's okay to do in your CI for your example. Now, the trickiest part of all this is illustrating with the theme. And I really need to look at my theme real carefully to come up with the analogy. And so processes in the brain that control thought, learning, decision-making, self-evaluation become more advanced during adolescence due to variables such as experience and increased freedom. Now that's a lot of words. So what I need to do is try to think about what is the underlying relationship there. And what I am seeing is things advancing when there are changes due to other things occurring or due to maturation, as we see with adolescence. And so when you see that, an example of maybe that still illustrates this theme is that this stage of life is like a snake shedding off its skin to expose a new layer that continues to grow. And I thought this was a really good analogy because what it does is it shows the increasing capacity, the fact that adolescents grow beyond what was previously possible for them as children to be able to have and be able to do so much more, as we see with abstract thinking. And so in that case, the snake shedding off its skin is a very illustrative kind of analogy. Okay, so with that, I would go ahead and press save and upload to Blackboard, and that's how I would get my first CI assignment done. Like I said, the first article, it's much easier to go ahead and do it when you only have a single article. In my next example, I'm going to quickly show what it's like to have two articles and trying to combine those themes into the CI in the same manner. Thank you.